Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into the life cycle of disruption, and we're going to figure out exactly how to build digital resilience in a landscape that's just accelerating at breakneck speed. We've got some incredibly fascinating ground to cover today, drawing on decades of research to unpack some of the most influential business theories ever established.
So, let's start with the ultimate business paradox. Have you ever wondered why industry giants so often collapse precisely because they do everything right? I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? But when we look at the data and the history of digital disruption, this exact pattern plays out over and over again. These great companies don't fail because of poor management. They actually fail because their management was perfectly optimized for a world that simply stopped existing.
To answer why this happens, here is our agenda for today. We'll cover 1. How new ideas spread. 2. The innovator's dilemma. 3. Riding the technology S-curve. 4. The AI compression effect. 5. Mastering ambidextrous leadership. And 6. Digital portfolio management.
Okay, section 1. How new ideas spread, or the anatomy of change.
Before we can even begin to understand business failure, we really have to understand how innovation spreads in the first place. This is Everett Rogers' classic 1962 diffusion of innovations curve, and it brilliantly shows how an idea spreads through a population in this highly predictable wave. You see, it always starts with a tiny fraction of risk-taking innovators. We're talking just 2.5%, before moving to early adopters, then the massive early and late majorities, and finally, the laggards. Rogers basically showed us that adoption is a social process, right? It's not just a rational one. People actually need to see perceived advantages and compatibility before they're willing to change their behavior.
But here is where it gets incredibly dangerous for modern tech. As Geoffrey Moore later identified, there is a literal chasm, a deadly gap right before the early majority. You've got visionary early adopters who want breakthrough technology, but the pragmatist early majority, well, they want proven industry standard solutions. Because these two groups expect entirely different things. So many promising high-tech products fall right into this chasm and just disappear forever. Crossing it takes a massive, unified, strategic push.
Moving on to section 2, the innovator's dilemma, the trap of success.
So, what exactly happens when a disruptive idea successfully crosses that chasm and comes straight for an established market leader? Well, this brings us to Clayton Christensen's famous paradox, the innovator's dilemma. He breaks down two main types of innovation. First, sustaining innovation, which improves existing products for your absolute best, highest-paying customers. But then you have disruptive innovation. This starts at the bottom. It's usually simpler, cheaper, and frankly, initially, kind of inferior. The dilemma here is that incumbents completely logically choose to invest in sustaining innovations because, well, that's where the profit margins are. By doing exactly what business schools teach them, listening to their best customers, they systematically ignore those cheaper disruptive threats.
And we see this everywhere. Take Kodak. They actually invented the first digital camera back in 1975. No way, right? But because their film margins were just so incredibly high, they couldn't justify allocating resources to a lower quality digital alternative that would basically cannibalize their own profits. Blockbuster did the exact same thing. They looked at Netflix's early DVD by mail model and just saw a low margin niche. So the takeaway here is that these weren't poorly managed companies. Their perfectly rational, profit-driven resource allocation processes simply prevented them from embracing the exact things that ultimately destroyed them.
Now for section 3, riding the technology S-curve, tracking performance and investment.
To truly map this threat landscape and figure out when disruption is going to hit, we have to look at the S-curve of technology. This tracks performance over time or effort, and it has 3 distinct phases. First, you've got a slow start. You're learning the tech, and returns on effort are pretty low. Then, boom, the rapid rise. Core mechanisms click into place, mainstream adoption hits, and performance skyrockets. This right here is where most commercial value gets generated. Finally, we hit the flattening out phase. The technology reaches its physical or market limits, and suddenly every incremental improvement costs way more than the last one. Your survival absolutely depends on knowing when your current curve is flattening and when it's time to make the jump to the next one.
But listen, jumping to a new S-curve is not free, and it is definitely not painless. To get there, you first have to endure what's called the productivity J-curve. This is a brutal initial period of heavy investment and negative cash flow that you need to build a new capability from scratch. You literally have to willingly endure financial pain and uncertainty before that new growth phase even begins. And honestly, this is exactly why incumbents hesitate, and it's exactly why disruptors manage to gain a foothold.
Let's move to section 4, the AI compression effect, the accelerating roller coaster.
We have to see how all of this builds into the modern digital threat, because the rules of the game, they're changing so fast. Historically, navigating an S-curve transition took decades. Just think about the transition from sailing ships to steamships. But today, we're dealing with the AI compression effect. We are moving from writing complex code to simply vibe coding, using AI to generate functional software through natural language in a matter of seconds. The impact of this is huge. It radically shrinks multi-decade life cycles into much, much shorter spans. The transition points between mature technologies and disruptive ones are accelerating rapidly, which drastically reduces the window you have as a business leader to recognize a threat and jump to the next curve.
So the absolutely crucial point here is summarized perfectly by this quote from our sources. The rapidly rising part of the S-curve is often underestimated. What does that mean for you? Well, if you wait for your current technology or business model to visibly plateau before you start exploring new options, you are already too late. In our highly compressed digital landscape, waiting around is basically a fatal mistake. Section 5. Mastering ambidextrous leadership. Surviving the S-curve jump. So here is the million-dollar question. How do you actually lead an organization through this incredibly fast, treacherous terrain? To survive, leaders have to embrace what's known as ambidextrous leadership. That means mastering a really deep structural tension within your company. On one side, you absolutely must have an exploit mindset. You need transactional leadership to optimize your current operations and extract that near-term cash. But on the exact same token, you simultaneously need an explore mindset. You need transformational leadership to test, learn, and discover tomorrow's value. You basically have to be a hyper-efficient machine today while acting like a scrappy, disruptive startup for tomorrow. To pull off this ambidextrity, you have to instill a brand new digital DNA into your teams. It means maintaining a sense of constructive discontentment, always believing that there's a better way out there. It demands a really ruthless discipline to just kill off projects that aren't working. It means looking at risk not as something to avoid, but as a genuine strategic asset. And of course, it requires embedding agile methodologies right into your culture, so your teams can test and learn in short, rapid cycles without completely losing their operational focus. And finally, Section 6, Digital Portfolio Management, Building Digital Resilience. So, how do we physically organize a business to actually do all this? This is where digital portfolio management comes into play. Building digital resilience isn't just about having a bunch of different products. It's about actively managing a portfolio of entirely different business models. You need a systemic way to highlight which models are your current cash cows and which high-risk, high-reward models are going to be the ones generating your cash in the future. And this strategy requires mapping your portfolio into two very distinct zones. First, your exploit zone for today, which focuses on mature models. Your goal here isn't wild growth, it's to extract cash efficiently. Why? Because you're deliberately going to use those profits to fund your explore zone for tomorrow. That's where those disruptive, early-stage innovations live, the ones that are currently stuck in that painful, negative cash flow J-curve. You are literally using today's S-curve to buy your ticket onto tomorrow's S-curve. Now, as you balance this complex portfolio, you really have to rigorously align your strategies across the 8 key elements of a business model. Whether you're exploiting today or exploring tomorrow, you've got to constantly evaluate your value proposition, your revenue model, your competitive advantage, and your organizational development. It's like a giant puzzle, and if any one of these puzzle pieces fails to adapt to the shifting digital environment, the whole shebang can collapse. And as you're trying to piece all of this together, I want you to keep this guiding principle in mind. Perfection is the enemy of progress, so progress trumps. Look, in a landscape where AI and digital tech are compressing timeframes and speeding up disruption, overplanning in a boardroom is going to get you killed. You just can't sit around waiting for the perfect plan. You have to relentlessly prioritize forward progress, rapid testing, and continuous reinvention. We've seen how ideas diffuse, why incredibly successful companies fall into the trap of their own success, and how the S-curve of technology is moving faster today than it ever has before. The next wave of disruption, it isn't decades away. It is accelerating right now as we speak. So looking at your own organization, the only question you really need to ask yourself today is your portfolio ready to jump? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.